It's quite hard to believe, but it's already been 11 years since the release of Final Fantasy XII. Arriving as the last numbered Final Fantasy game on the hugely successful PlayStation 2, it served as Yasumi Matsuno's final credit before he left Square Enix, although he did later return as a freelancer for Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together. Looking back, Final Fantasy XII is a game that brought much to the table, but at the same time divided fans and critics when it was released because of this fact. Those who have since revisited the title now see that perhaps it was ahead of its time, offering one of the most expansive, customizable and complex gameplay systems in the Gambit system, and featuring a story that focused more on political struggles than that of the relationships between angsty teenagers. Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age is of course also now a thing, and it's going to be releasing in a matter of months. It means that those who perhaps didn't get the chance to play it the first time around, or those who it perhaps didn't resonate with, will get the chance to check it out again. There will be differences this time around though, as it isn't the core game that's being remastered, it's instead the international Zodiac job system, which added quite a few new mechanics. Anyway, to celebrate the fact we're getting the remaster, and also to celebrate Final Fantasy XII's 11th birthday, we wanted to show the game some love. Before we dive in though, please be sure to subscribe to our channel for more awesome content, and like this video and share it around. Alright, so without further ado, my name is Daryl, and here are 10 facts about Final Fantasy XII you might not have known and will hopefully find pretty darn interesting. Starting with the fact that chronologically, Final Fantasy XII is the first game in the Ivalice franchise. Created by Yasumi Matsuno in 1995 when he joined Square, the world of Ivalice grew to become what is now known as the Ivalice Alliance. This includes titles such as Final Fantasy Tactics, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, Crystal Defenders, and of course, Final Fantasy XII. For years, not much was actually known about the timelines between these various games though, but this all changed when the Final Fantasy XII Ultimania Omega was released. In this book, it was confirmed that the events of Final Fantasy XII occurred before Final Fantasy Tactics. During the same year that Final Fantasy XII released, Final Fantasy Tactics A2 Grimoire of the Rift was also released, and during its promotional campaign it was revealed in an interview with IGN that both Tactics Advance and Tactics Advance A2 also take place after Final Fantasy XII. With Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings acting as a direct sequel, the only main game then remaining is Vagrant Story, if of course we're going to ignore Final Fantasy Tactics S and the Crystal Defenders sub-franchise. The issue here though is that Matsuno himself doesn't believe Vagrant Story should be part of the Ivalice Alliance. During a Twitter conversation which was captured on NeoGAF, Matsuno revealed that he never meant for the game to be set in the same world as Tactics and Final Fantasy XII. The references that appear are just Easter eggs to him. Square Enix though feels otherwise and continue to market Vagrant Story as part of the Ivalice Alliance, and due to the fact those references to the other properties do exist, it therefore is assumed that Vagrant Story is the last chronological game in the Ivalice series, putting Final Fantasy XII right at the beginning. Final Fantasy XII held the Guinness World Record for the longest development time. It seems kinda trivial now given how long Final Fantasy XV took to make, but once upon a time Final Fantasy XII once held the Guinness World Record for the longest development time in history for a video game. As noted in the 2008 Gamers Edition of the Guinness World Records book, Final Fantasy XII took 5 years for the team at Square to complete after development started in December 2000. The development, as was now well documented, was beset by issues, and one of those issues was that the game's director, Yasumi Matsuno, even had to leave the project for alleged health reasons. It held the record until the release of the ill-fated Duke Nukem Forever, which at 14 years and 44 days of development time is unlikely to be broken for quite some time. It was the first Final Fantasy title to receive a perfect Famitsu score. Although it wasn't the first Yasumi Matsuno title to receive a perfect score from the venerable Japanese publication Famitsu, as Vagrant Story also achieved that milestone, Final Fantasy XII was the first game in the Final Fantasy franchise to do so. It didn't come without controversy though, as publications in the West felt that Famitsu were perhaps influenced to provide such a score. Wired even made the bold accusation that Famitsu were often compensated for high review scores based on ad spend. Before Final Fantasy XII achieved this accolade, the highest score in the franchise was actually Final Fantasy X, which achieved a 39, and Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy IX achieved a 38. But since Final Fantasy XII paved the way, we've also seen Final Fantasy XIII Part 2 gain a perfect score from Famitsu. Final Fantasy XIII and Type 0 also achieved a 39 out of 40. It offered the first villainous Cid in the series. You might love Cid in his many other iterations, but Final Fantasy XII offered fans their first taste of a villainous Cid. moonlighting as a mad scientist in Final Fantasy XII, Sidolphus Demen Bonanza, or Dr. Sid for short, also had a rather close relationship with one of the main cast members. The decision to make Sid a villain would end up starting something of a trend within the franchise. Final Fantasy XIII of course had Sid Reigns appearing as an antagonist, and Sid Olstein appeared as the main villain in Final Fantasy Type 0. The scene where PENELO is tied up was cut from the Japanese version due to real life events. At the time of Final Fantasy XII's release, a serial killer named Tsutomu Miyazaki was in the spotlight in the media. He was given the death sentence for abducting and murdering 4 girls in the Saitama and Tokyo prefectures, and his death sentence was carried out in January 2006, 2 months before Final Fantasy XII's release. Although Square has never officially said that this incident was the one that made them remove the scene from the Japanese version where PENELO is tied up, they did say that this specific scene was cut due to incidents in the real world that would have made it difficult for Final Fantasy XII to release at the lower age rating they wanted. This removal marks one of the few times where a scene was cut from the Japanese version of a Final Fantasy game, but was retained for the Western release. Final Fantasy XII International Zodiac Job System was due to be called Final Fantasy XII ANNEX. Due to the sheer significance of the changes appearing within Final Fantasy XII International, Hiroyuki Ito, who served as the producer and director of the source game, did not want it to be compared to previous international releases like Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy X. He felt that traditionally international versions would see new monsters and new dungeons, but he wanted to change the gameplay experience completely for the Final Fantasy XII International version. It was therefore due to be called Final Fantasy XII ANNEX, to signify the depth of the changes that would be made. However, due to the strong Zodiac theme running throughout the experience, and perhaps because Ito wasn't able to implement all of the changes he wanted to in the expanded version, they instead settled for the much more literal subtitle, Zodiac Job System. To make sure that fans understood what the game was, they also ended up throwing International back in to create Final Fantasy XII International Zodiac Job System. It was the first Final Fantasy main series game to feature completely different summons. At this point in the history of the franchise, Final Fantasy fans were used to seeing staple summons in their numbered releases. These would include Bahamut, Shiva and Ifrit. However, for Final Fantasy XII they were cut in favour of sticking with the Ivalice summons that were introduced with Final Fantasy Tactics. The summons featured in Final Fantasy XII, as they also did in Tactics, therefore relate to the signs of the Zodiac, with the exception of Zodiac, Keeper of Precepts, who is based on Ophiuchus, which is another constellation. VAAN and ASHE had already appeared in another game before Final Fantasy XII even released. Both VAAN and ASHE appeared in another Square Enix title called Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy Itadaki Street Special 2 years before Final Fantasy XII even released. They were later joined by PENELO and Balthier for the PlayStation Portable version, but this released in Japan after Final Fantasy XII. Square Enix has since been reluctant to follow this trend, with Noctis Lucis Calumet not being added to any other Square Enix properties until Final Fantasy XV released. However, we do now know that Noctis will be joining the cast of the new Itadaki Street game that's being produced for the franchise's 30th anniversary. Only 500 GABRANTH helmets were ever made. Positioned as the most expensive piece of Final Fantasy XII merchandise available, the full-size Judge GABRANTH helmet is pretty rare. In fact, there were only 500 of these ever made. Even now, this serves as one of the most sought-after pieces of merchandise for collectors, and prices can get pretty high. eBay listings often go for over $1,000. If you're lucky enough to have your grubby mitts on one of these helmets, cherish it, as there are tons of Final Fantasy XII fans who would love to have one. Final Fantasy XII is the only game in the main series to remain on one console. Alright, so this is kind of a moot point with the Zodiac Age coming out in a few months, but I wanted to include it as a nice look at the future. It's a good segue. It's just somewhat strange, given how much critical praise the game received when it was released, that until the Zodiac Age releases, Final Fantasy XII remains the only game in the main series that is only available to play on one console, the PlayStation 2. Of course, come the 11th of January 2017, the Western world will be able to play it on their spruced up PlayStation 4s, which makes everything better. So that's 10 facts about Final Fantasy XII that you probably didn't know. Are there any you feel we missed out? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. Also, please be sure to head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/FFunion. You can find out how you can support the channel and even get your name at the end of videos like these awesome folks. Alright, thanks for watching guys, this is Daryl signing out. I'll see you next time.